Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Southern resident orcas are using kelp tools to groom each other. The fact that our local orcas do this grooming together as a social behavior is a big deal. In a minute, Dr. Michael Weiss from the Center for Whale Research will tell us more about it and what it could mean for future marine research. But first, let's get you caught up. A preliminary report into the cause of the Air India flight that crashed, killing 290 people, is expected in the next couple of days, according to Reuters. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner crashed just 32 seconds after takeoff June 12th. The investigation is focusing on the engine fuel control switches. A source told Reuters the investigation has not raised any immediate concerns over mechanical failure. Washington State is booming, but not in the way you might think. The Seattle Times FYI guy crunched the latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau and noted a demographic shift. For the first time in most of the state's counties, adults over 65 outnumbered children under 18. The Times notes there are still more children than adults 65 and over in Washington, but the two groups are trending in opposite directions. And if you're thinking about getting out of town this weekend, you might want to leave early. By Friday night at 11, WashDOT says there will be closures along southbound I-5 at Seattle Convention Center, southbound I-405 in Kirkland, northbound I-405 in Renton, and southbound State Route 167 in Kent. Things will reopen early Monday, but through the weekend, transportation officials say prepare for significant delays. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Last year, researchers from Washington's Whale Research Center discovered southern resident killer whales using pieces of bull kelp to groom each other. They dubbed the behavior allo-kelping, and researchers still don't know why they do it. But social tool use is fairly rare in animals, especially in marine life. So we wanted to find out more. Dr. Michael Weiss is a research director at the Center for Whale Research in Friday Harbor. He's here to tell us more about this discovery and what it might mean. Dr. Weiss, really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, Whale Research Center has been around for almost 50 years studying orcas. How is it just now that we have found whales doing this?
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about. These are some of the best studied animals, wild animals anywhere in the world, certainly some of the best studied whales anywhere in the world. What it comes down to is that this behavior, despite apparently being pretty common, we see it on more days than we don't at this point, is kind of subtle. We knew that they were very tactile, that they rubbed on each other and rolled around on each other. But it wasn't until we both got this aerial perspective from a drone looking down at the whales and also got this really great zoom lens on this new aircraft that we were actually able to see these pieces of kelp, because we're, over 100 feet above the whales with these drones, and these pieces of kelp are 2 feet long and just, an inch or so wide. So they're really quite small on the scale of a killer whale and on the scale of, over 100 feet above the animals. So it really took the right tools to be able to see this behavior.
I'm glad you brought up that the behavior is rather subtle, especially to the naked eye through the lens, because I had a hard time seeing what they were doing when I was looking at the footage online. So tell me exactly what you were able to capture.
I'll kind of describe it from start to finish. So if your listeners haven't seen a bull kelp stalk before, I bet they have, but just in case they haven't, you kind of have to imagine this long tube-like structure, many meters long, that kind of tapers down to a thin end on one side. And on the other thick side, it ends in this big round bulb, which is filled with gas and floats at the surface. And then there's these leafy blades that come off of it. So what whales would do is they'd approach this stalk and they'd grab that thin end that's dangling down in the water in their teeth. And with kind of a jerk of their head and a downward swimming motion, they'd break off that 2-foot length of stipe or stem that I was talking about. So it's this kind of 2-foot long, thin tube of brown algae. They'll then carry that in their mouth, sometimes for a few hundred meters until they find the partner that they want to do this behavior with. They'll approach that partner from behind, flip that kelp onto their nose, onto their rostrum, and then kind of push their head against this partner. So wedging this kelp between their head and their partner's flank, their partner's body. They'll swim forward a bit so that the kelp rolls backwards and ends up between the midsection of these two whales. Once it's there, they'll roll back and forth. They'll kind of twist their bodies. They'll adopt this big S-shaped posture. And all the while, they're keeping that kelp wedged between them and rolling it across their bodies. And they'll do that for anywhere from, we have a few observations that are just a few seconds, but we have other observations that are close to 15 minutes of just rubbing this kelp on their bodies back and forth.
What do you think they're trying to do? I mean, it makes sense to say they're grooming, but specifically, this kelp is rather smooth, if I remember it.
Yeah, so we don't know exactly what it's doing for them yet. We, so far, have only been able to look at it at the level of, which whales are doing it, what characteristics correlate with doing this behavior more. And the one kind of individual level trait that we found correlated with it, we didn't find any differences between the sexes. We didn't find any difference with age, but we did find that whales with more dead skin coverage, with more kind of this, gray, peely looking skin, those whales with more of that were more likely to do the behavior. So we think it has something to do with dead skin. Maybe it is exfoliating, or the kelp is rubbing the dead skin off. Maybe it's relieving itchiness related, and discomfort related to having a lot of dead skin. Brown algae also has antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties that could be helping them there. So we don't know exactly what it's doing, but we do know that whales with more dead skin are more likely to do it. So it has something to do with that. And the other thing that we think they're doing is just building social bonds, right? So we find that this behavior happens more between closely related individuals and individuals that are close together in age as well, both things that kind of correlate with other social behaviors in these killer whales. So we think, very much like grooming in chimps and other primates, that there is this kind of hygienic function around dead skin, but also, and potentially more importantly, they are building their relationships with one another.
That's really, really interesting. As you mentioned, this kind of behavior isn't completely unique among marine mammals, but this behavior, because of the social component, is.
Yeah, so both kind of parts of it, tool use and kind of the kelping using seaweed, are observed in other marine mammals. Kelping is really widespread among cetaceans, whales, and dolphins. And that's just swimming through kelp and getting kelp kind of draped over your body, maybe rolling around a bit. There's also other marine mammals that use tools. Sea otters will find rocks to break open shellfish. Some dolphins in Australia will use sponges as cushions while they're searching through the sediment looking for fish. But what's unique here is that they're using a tool, but not like those two examples I just listed, to find food, right? They're not acquiring food with this tool. They are potentially doing some hygiene, and they're building social relationships. In fact, it's a type of tool use that you can only do with two animals, right? You can't do it on your own, which is really unique. And also, as I was describing that, what they're doing, they're not just finding little lengths of kelp in the environment and using them. They're finding entire kelp stalks, and then they're changing them, they're modifying them into a shape that they can use for this behavior. That's really quite rare in marine animals. It's pretty rare in animals generally.
Was this behavior, you said it was rare, was it surprising?
Oh yeah, super surprising to see. The first couple times we saw it, we kind of were like, that's interesting, but we'll put that in the data set. Whales do weird things sometimes, maybe it's a one-off or a rare thing. It wasn't really until we started seeing it day after day, sometimes multiple times a day with multiple different individuals. We have a few videos where there's 2 or 3 different pairs all doing it at the same time. Once you see it occurring over and over as an animal behavior researcher, you're like, okay, this is not just animals being weird. This is a major part of their lives and probably has some kind of function. And that was, it's a great process. And it was pretty exciting.
Was there a moment that was kind of the tipping point in terms of like, all right, this is actually something?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had 2 clear observations of this behavior. The very first time we ever used our zoom camera, we saw J35 and J57 interacting, and J35 had a bit of kelp. That got logged away. Second time, we had J19 and J41. That's a grandmother and her grandson doing this behavior for 15 minutes. And we had saved that, and we're very interested in it to maybe write a little note in, some journal to say, look, we saw these 2 whales doing this thing one time. Isn't that weird? The real tipping point was like a month after that observation. We were with J-Pod swimming through a kelp forest. And we're zoomed out, we're looking at the whole group, and I see 2 whales, J31 and J56, kind of coming together and getting in contact. And immediately it's like, I bet if we zoom in, I bet there's a piece of kelp there. And we zoomed in, and sure enough, there's J56 with a piece of kelp in her mouth doing the behavior. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then the next 20, 30 minutes, we saw, I think, 4 or 5 different pairs all doing this behavior in this one group. And that day was really the day.
What do you need to do to prove what you're saying for this to become accepted science, accepted research, I guess?
We need more detailed analysis, and crucially, we need data over a longer time period. So let's take the social side of stuff. If we want to be able to say, allokelping builds social bonds, we need to be able to look at, in one time period, which pairs of individuals were doing this behavior a lot. And in the next time period, did that increase the rate of other social behaviors? Did whales who did this behavior together end up sharing food more? Did they end up hunting together more? Did they end up, staying in the same group more? So we need to actually be able to show that over time, doing this behavior builds relationships. And it's really the same story on the skincare, hygiene kind of side of things, right? If you're doing your beauty routine more often, your skin should get better. So if we can show those 2 things, or either one of those, and really get the kind of function down, that would go a long way to going from, this is a great observation with some good data that's very, very indicative of, a form of tool use, to, okay, we can now more solidly say, here is the benefit of the behavior, here's what they're trying to do. And then that opens up all kinds of other things around how do they learn to do it? How did it emerge? Does it show up in other killer whale populations?
What does this discovery mean for the future of orca research?
Yeah, both in killer whale research and marine mammal research generally, thinking of tool use specifically, there's this idea that marine species use tools less than terrestrial species. And that's just based on looking at, the literature. There's way more reports of it in terrestrial species than in marine species. Some of that might be due to their body plan, right? If you're swimming in water, you probably don't have these grasping appendages, hands and stuff to grab and manipulate tools. You have flippers. But I think what this shows is part of it might be there's a lot of cases of tool use out there that are just hard to see, and we just haven't had the right tools yet to see them. The fact that this new behavior shows up in a population that's been studied for almost 50 years opens up all of these questions about what we're missing in less well-studied populations. And I think while I'm kind of talking about that in terms of tool use, I think that goes for any kind of behavior you're interested in. There might be all kinds of things happening that we just don't have the tools to see yet, and that we're not even looking for.
Dr. Michael Weiss is Research Director at the Center for Whale Research in the San Juan Islands. Thank you so much for taking the time telling us about this really, really fascinating discovery.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Vaughn Jones, Andy Hurst, Paige Browning, and Shane Malin. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.